The Honourable Paul Green.
Thank you, Mr. President. I move that the House acknowledge. I'll just start from the top, Mr. President. That this House acknowledges the service and sacrifice of our war veterans. That this House notes that ANZAC Day, 25th April, is one of Australia's most important national occasions. It marks the anniversary of the first military action fought by Australian and New Zealand forces during the First World War. B, in subsequent years, ANZAC Day also served to commemorate those who lost their lives in all the military and peacekeeping operations in which Australia has been involved. And C, that the spirit of ANZAC, with its qualities, courage, mateship and sacrifice, continues to have meaning and relevance for our sense of national identity. Mr. President, I rise before the House today on behalf of the Christian Democratic Party to speak on my motion on ANZAC Day. First and foremost, I would like to say it's an honour to continue this dedication so passionately served in this House by the Honourable Charlie Lynn, MLC. ANZAC Day, 25th April, is one of Australia's most important national occasions. It marks the anniversary of the first major military action fought by Australian and New Zealand forces during the First World War. Mr. President, Gallipoli was different for Australia, as it was the first major battle we as Australians fought as a nation. Soldiers from every state of new federated Australia volunteered and fought. What was to sear itself into our national soul was the sheer scale of casualties that would be faced. Gallipoli lasted 8.5 months. In that time, 7,600 Australians and 2,500 New Zealanders were killed. 24,000 were wounded. Gallipoli was not the first time that Australians had been in battle, and it was by no means an outstanding success. In fact, Gallipoli was a battle we lost. And I know Charlie Lynn would say, and Kokoda, we won. But back to Gallipoli, and people still ask why we celebrate this defeat. But there is something very Australian in coming together for such a cause. In subsequent years, ANZAC Day has served to commemorate those who served and or lost their lives in military and peacekeeping operations in Australia, and particularly in that which Australia was involved. ANZAC Day is a day we mark our respect and gratitude for the service and the very freedom that we enjoy today. The Australian Army states, quote, "It is sometimes difficult to understand why it is with gratitude that we should remember, but we have enjoyed the benefits of the peace and easy existence, which was purchased at the cost of many lives. Few of us have ever had to risk everything ourselves or chance our loved ones to the dangers of war. But for older generations of Australians, remembering such things is easier. War and death came far too frequently into their lives, as in the past the men and women of our armed forces saw active service in places such as Belgium, Borneo, France, Korea, Malaya, the Middle East, New Guinea, Palestine, Turkey and Vietnam. Mr. President, today a new generation of soldiers, airmen and sailors are serving in the troubled locations including Afghanistan, Timor-Leste, Egypt, Iraq, the Middle East, Sudan and Solomon Islands. It is now a long-standing tradition that on ANZAC Day we all pause to remember those that offered up their lives in the defence of their nation and communities, which is the greatest contribution any one citizen can make. They go on to say, Mr. President, future generations need to be reminded that happiness has a price. For surely if happiness is the product of freedom, then freedom is the reward of courage. We should be grateful to those that have helped preserve our nation and its way of life through their sacrifice. In doing so, we keep bright the memory of those lives. It is in the remembrance of these things that communities across the nation continually come together on this day. This year, Mr. President, I attended, as per usual of my custom on ANZAC Day, the RSL sub-branch ANZAC Day dawn service at Greenwell Point. we commemorated the immortal day when young men of Australia, by their deeds and sacrifice, demonstrated to the world at Gallipoli that Australia was truly a nation. On this day, we remember the sacrifice of such men and women for an ideal way of life. We were asked to take strength in the knowledge and the hope that our sons and daughters will never forget the example of their forefathers. We were asked to mourn with pride, but to also remember with pride. To those who serve and many of those that continue to still live. On this day, we were asked to remember the brave and the gallant soldiers, undaunted airmen and noble women who were faithful to this country unto death. We were asked to remember the men and women who gave up their jobs, their passions, their pastimes, their families and their friends to lay down their lives. We were asked to remember the doctors, the nurses, the workers under the Red Cross and those fulfilling ministry of help and healing who saved others but yet could not save themselves. We were asked to remember the innocent, the helpless lives that had been lost. And we were also asked to remember the beloved sons and brothers and fathers and husbands and friends that were not to come home. The spirit of ANZAC, Mr. President, with its qualities of courage, mateship and sacrifice, continue to have meaning and relevance for our sense of national identity. The ANZAC spirit is a concept which suggests that Australian and New Zealand soldiers possess shared characteristics, specifically qualities those soldiers allegedly exemplified on the battlefield of World War I. These qualities include endurance, courage, ingenuity, good humour, larrikinism and mateship. I found an interesting quote, Mr. President, while researching this particular paper with my advisor. I am an Australian soldier. I am a warrior and a member of a team. I serve the people of Australia. I will always place the mission first. I will never accept defeat. I will never quit. I will never leave a fallen comrade. I am a guardian of freedom and the Australian way of life. I am an Australian soldier. Mr. Deputy President, as part of becoming a politician, I've enjoyed a journey about learning about the footsteps of many before me, and I've had the privilege as Shoalhaven Mayor to be a part of a leadership team to lead some young people up the Kokoda Trail. And I must admit that political process has got me more involved with ANZAC days and Remembrance days and the Boer War memorials, and there's a plethora of other things that should be on the agenda in those terms. But one thing that constantly renews my enthusiasm to be at that is the fact that we should remember, unless we forget about the price. But one of the byproducts of that particular journey in my life of learning more about my nation and the sacrifice was I had the privilege one time, sadly, of being at my pop's funeral. And my pop, what was really faithful was the RSL came and did a bit of a ceremony to honour him. Yeah. Now, I don't think many of those people knew him. I don't think he had a journey with the RSL particularly. Actually, he was a keen bowler, spent most of the time on the bowling green. But what was really special to me was here this man had some history, which I wasn't aware of that time, the depth of it, which I will share shortly. But I just loved the way that the RSL came in and honoured that man for such a time as that, of times gone by that he never spoke to us about. And then some of that journey I've been discovering of recent times with applications to the Australian Memorial for information on him. So it's that story that I'll share now. But my pop, Private Edward George Phipps, was enlisted in Paddington, New South Wales on the 21st of October 1941. He joined the 2nd 4th Australian Infantry Battalion, and from the research within Australian War Memorial, I get this story. The 2nd 4th Battalion's first draft of recruits arrived at Ingleburn Camp on the 3rd of November 1939. following the formation in its headquarters at Victoria Barracks in Sydney the previous week. Part of the 16th Brigade of the 6th Australian Division, the battalion departed Sydney for service overseas on the 10th of January 1940. While the battalion was en route for the Middle East, Australian infantry brigades were reorganised along the British lines with 3 battalions instead of 4. This meant that the 2nd 4th Battalion was eventually transferred to the 19th Brigade but remained part of the 6th Division. Arriving in the Middle East on 4th of February 1940, the 2nd 4th Battalion trained in the Palestine and in Egypt in preparation for its first campaign against the Italians in East Libya, but was more active during the Battle of Tobruk from the 22nd to the 21st and 22nd of January 1941. In early April 1941, the 2nd 4th, with the rest of the 6th Division, deployed to Greece to resist the anticipated German invasion. After a period of training in Palestine, the 2nd 4th joined the force garrison in Syria. It completed this duty in mid-January 1942, embarked for home on 12th of February, and arrived at Adelaide on the 27th of March. In June, the 19th Brigade was deployed to defend Darwin, and the 2nd 4th Brigade remained there for what became a boring and frustrating year. The brigade rejoined the rest of the 6th Division training in northern Queensland in June 1943, but another 18 months would pass before it saw action again. The 2nd 4th Battalion landed at Atape in New Guinea on the 2nd November 1944 to undertake its only campaign against the Japanese. Its most intense effort took place between April and July. Following the Japanese surrender on 15th of August, drafts of the 2nd 4th Battalion men began returning to Australia for discharge. The remainder of the battalion itself arrived home on 26 October and disbanded at Chermside in Queensland on the 12th of November 1945. My pop particularly was discharged on the 12th of December in 1945. Mr. Deputy President, you don't realise that my pop never mentioned any of this. What a hero. Many men were silent about what they did and what they saw and what they experienced. And sadly, I think a large part of that was because of the absolute carnage and deprivation, and sadly, probably the most, virtually, there can be no good when humans hurt humans, Mr. Deputy President. And to be in a situation where they've got firearms and bombs, that could only be just your worst imagination. And it's no wonder that many men and women who return from the services field never share such stories. And it really is to their credit, because I know one thing about life: if you start to share images, they stick with others for quite a time, and they can't be washed or wiped or cleaned out of your mind. And to all our forefathers that had those images and kept them for the sake of protecting our minds and our hearts, and to be able to allow us to have a life of purity and unintended evil in terms of the evilness of war, is a real credit to them, because I'm sure many of them, probably by suppressing that, those emotions, came at great cost, as we know, to many of the families, marriages and communities as they tried to deal with those repressed feelings and thoughts and understandings. Mr. Deputy President, Christopher Reeve once quoted, quote, "A hero is an ordinary individual who finds the strength to persevere and endure in spite of overwhelming obstacles," unquote. Mr. Deputy President, my pop Private Edward George Phipps, among many others, was a hero. I am honoured and humbled to have a history and a legacy as part of the ANZACs through my pop. Mr. Deputy President, they shall not grow old as we are left to grow old, and age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. And the going down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.